All right, what's up, everybody? This is Jonathan Troll with TRNCH Talent. Today, we're joined by one of the greatest offensive linemen to ever play, Joe Thomas, a 10-time Pro Bowler, 6-time first-team All-Pro. Joe redefined the what level of consistency and dominance looks like at left tackle in his Hall of Fame career for the Cleveland Browns. Joe, it's an honor to have you on here today.
Jonathan, thanks for having me on, man. I love coming on great podcasts like this and talking ball with offensive linemen, the big hog mollies. Nothing gets me more excited than getting into the weeds with that stuff. So I'm really pumped and excited to be with you today.
Appreciate that, Joe. Let's get into it. So, when you look back on the beginning of your career, can you tell us a little bit about that journey to the NFL, and at what point did you realize that football was your path that you were going to take?
Yeah, so I don't know if I had a very typical start to being an NFL offensive lineman, but I started playing fullback when I played football for the first time in seventh grade. And played fullback and outside linebacker on defense in seventh and eighth grade, a little bit of tight end in eighth grade. And then when I got to high school, not as much fullback, more tight end and defensive end. And then by the time I became a senior, I was playing on a team that would throw the ball maybe 6 to 8 times a game. Uh, and so having me as a tight end was basically just an extension of being the next tackle, because all we did was run the ball. And so I would play tackle, guard. I would flip sides. It was old school. We ran the old wing T offense. My head coach and offensive coordinator, I think he was born in 1880s, and then grew up learning football in the 1930s, 40s. And so we were very, very old school. 3 yards in a cloud of dust was our motto. And so I really kind of learned a little bit more about blocking then, but I didn't know a whole lot about the specific position of playing left tackle until I got to college at Wisconsin. And I was probably a better defensive player actually in high school because defense is easy. Doesn't take as much learning, doesn't take as much thinking, doesn't take as much technique. And for me, it was just like a hungry dog in a meat shop, like, hey, see ball, go get ball. And I knew I had powerful hips, so I could get a tackle and extend, and I could shed him, and I could go make a tackle somewhere. And that was back in the days before you could not horse collar people, because I would just run him down and I'd grab him by the back of the shoulder pads. I'd throw him to the ground and hey, play was over. It was great. But then when I got to college, I did still play a little bit of defense my freshman year. I was the backup left tackle, played as a jumbo tight end. And then my bowl game my freshman year, I actually was a starter as a defensive end because we had some injuries and they knew I played in high school, and we did a little bit of a tryout going into our bowl game. And lo and behold, I was big enough and physical enough. Probably didn't know a whole lot, but that didn't matter. Again, playing defense doesn't take as much smarts as it does to play offense. And we were going against Auburn in that bowl game. So they had Ronnie Brown and Cadillac Williams and Marcus McNeil as a left tackle. So they had this massive offensive line and these big running backs. And so it was like, hey, we got a 285-pound freshman who played defensive end in high school, was pretty good. Let's put him over there and try to clog up the middle a little bit against this stout Auburn run game and this big offensive line that they got. And so that was pretty cool, like playing a little bit of defensive line as a freshman. I did it again as a junior in our bowl game, playing both ways. But really, once I got to college, I really started focusing on left tackle. And that was really where I was then for the rest of my career. But it kind of wasn't until my junior year in college when scouts started coming around and they started asking my coach things like, hey, is he going to come back for his senior year? And I was like, wait, what does that mean? Like, you think I could play in the NFL? And they're like, well, if we're asking you, do you want to come out early? That means you're probably going to be drafted. And so at the end of my junior year, I put my name into like this portal NFL review process where if you're an underclassman, you can get feedback from NFL teams and they give you kind of a rough idea of where you'd be drafted if you come out. And I think at that point, it was really good because it gave me an opportunity to see like where you'd be drafted. So if you're going to be a lower draft pick, maybe it makes more sense to go back to school, but at least you have all the information. And that was what the NFL wanted to do. So for me, the NFL told me I was going to be possibly the first or second offensive lineman taken. DeBrickashaw Ferguson was the top offensive tackle in that draft. But going back to playing defense, I was playing defense in our bowl game, playing defensive end, and I think we were playing Auburn again, maybe, or Arkansas, I can't remember. And I tore my ACL in that game. And so really, after I tore my ACL, it was really no question. of if I was going to come back or not and play my senior year at Wisconsin. So came back, played my senior year, and then was drafted. And I think I was probably later than most people as a college player to realize that I could play in the NFL because I really wasn't worried about it. For me, I was just having a great time. I loved football. I loved my teammates. I love my school. I went to Wisconsin. I love the party scene. I love my friends. Like I didn't want to change anything. So really for me, college was like the perfect place. And I really wasn't worried about the NFL, but I'm certainly glad that after my senior year, I did get drafted and got a great chance to play 11 years in the NFL.
That's awesome. I heard a story that you on draft night you ended up skipping going to New York for that and instead went fishing with your dad and you got the call while you were out there on the boat. Can you tell us a little bit about that moment?
Yeah, it's pretty cool for me now that I reflect back on things and, just working in capacity with the NFL. Still work for NFL media, NFL events, the Browns, and just traveling around the country. And people know me a little bit as NFL's Iron Man for setting the record for playing 10 and a half years without missing a snap. More people know me for going fishing on draft day, and they really connected with that story in a way that was completely unintentional for me. I was not a person that liked being in the limelight whatsoever. Like most offensive linemen, I didn't really want any attention because usually the attention you get as an offensive lineman is for something that you did that was wrong. Holding 73, ball start 73. Hey, you gave up a sack, and now my quarterback's dead. Thanks a lot, buddy. Let's get rid of him, right? So it was not a position that I was excited about. And the NFL was trying to sell me on going to New York for the draft, which back in 2007, the year I got drafted, they would invite the top 5 guys. And then you'd go out to New York, and it was just a 2-day event back then. And actually, it was like in the morning, which is things have changed a little bit
That's
now. I'm
crazy.
starting to feel a little bit older now that I'm 40, and now the draft is a enormous spectacle. It was still a big spectacle back then, but they tried to sell me as an offensive lineman that I would get all these marketing deals by going to the draft and getting your face on TV and stuff. And I go, you guys don't know me very well. Like, I don't care at all about that. For me, I just want to get drafted, find out where I'm going to play, and then go back to work. And it was much more interesting and fun and exciting to go fishing with my dad on draft day and spend that time with the loved ones, the people that were part of that journey to get me to going and getting a chance to live out a dream and playing in the NFL than it was to go and hug Roger Goodell and go buy some fancy suit that I didn't have any money for back then because we didn't have NIL. And the
Hmm.
only NIL we got was a $10 per diem after our games at Wisconsin. So, like, the whole idea of getting a suit and hanging out with people I didn't know and going to the big flashy city and, walking on stage was just something I wasn't interested in. And what I was interested in was keeping the tradition alive with my dad of going fishing on Saturdays. And so to bring it full circle, like, it's just fun for me to hear that I connected with people and it was meaningful because so many times somebody will come up to me and say, "Hey, you're the guy that went fishing on draft day, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." And they're like, "You know what? That meant so much to me." And then they'll break down and they'll say, "My dad passed in so and so year, and him and I loved to go fishing. And the memories that we made when I was a kid are something now that I'm trying to share those moments with my own son." And like, by you doing that, you just did a great job of putting everything in perspective for people that, the NFL is a big deal. It is cool. It's amazing. It's such a part of our lives as obviously people that play. But if you're an American, you probably watch football and you probably follow the NFL for the most part. And I think it puts it in perspective, like priorities of family, of friends, community, faith. And then, like, okay, now football. It should be that order. And people need to keep it like that and to spend time with their loved ones when they get a chance to do it. So it was never my intent to like, make it a story. If anything, I was trying to not be the story by not going to the draft. But it was cool just to see that it had a big impact on a lot of people. And I think it helped maybe put in perspective a little bit of the priorities that you should have in life.
I think it's just a true testament of not only who you are, but that ethos of what offensive linemen are, right? Kind of out of the spotlight, but out there doing our thing. So that's very cool. When you get that call to go to Cleveland, right, and you think about that transition going from Wisconsin to the NFL, do you think that transition was tougher than making the jump from high school to college ball? And could you talk about how you navigated those two different scenarios?
Yeah, the challenge of making those transitions were, I think, equally difficult, but very, very different because I mentioned a little bit that like when I played high school, the only time I came off the field was kick return. Like, I was our punter, I was our kicker. I played every snap on defense, I played every snap on offense, and so I was always out there. I was just playing sports because I love sports. I love competing, I love football. Like, I feel like that's what kids lose so much today by trying to specialize. Just go and have fun. Work hard, be competitive. Winning is important. Everything that we really want in life, we got to win to get it. Like, it's okay to teach kids that. It's okay to teach them that, you know what, sometimes life is hard. There's no easy button in life, and it's okay to work hard and get the returns and the payoff down the line of that hard work. And so when I was in high school, like, I didn't really have really good technique. I didn't really understand what it meant to be an offensive lineman. And so you jump from high school where you were doing it and you were dominating because you were just bigger and faster and stronger than everybody, to all of a sudden, well, now everybody is bigger and faster and stronger than me. And by the way, they've been training the right way, they've been eating the right way, and they've been getting the technique training that they need to be able to dominate you biomechanically. And so the learning curve was really steep. And I mean, I was swimming because the schemes were so much more advanced. The defenses were so much more advanced. Everything felt so fast in my mind. And I think I handled the transition because I didn't redshirt and I ended up playing in every game as a true freshman. But it felt like I didn't know my asshole from a hole in the ground at that point. And so it was not until, probably my second year where I really started feeling comfortable. Whereas when you get to the NFL, like, we're running the same schemes and concepts that we'd run in college, but you're just doing it and everything's happening so much faster. The defenses are so much more challenging. You have to make so many more calls on the line of scrimmage. So I think there was a steep learning curve, but I was able to shorten that because I had that base and that understanding of technique and biomechanics and how to watch film, how to practice. I was bigger at that point. When I was a freshman in college, I came in at 250 pounds and it took me 6 months to get up to 285, which, that's a lot of weight to gain in 6 months, but still, like, to be 285 pounds as a 6'7" offensive lineman, I was skinny. I was getting pushed around. So at least when I got to the NFL, I was 300 pounds. And so I was a little bit more physically ready, but definitely there is a different speed because I always tell people, like, when I'm talking to rookies that are in Cleveland, because I still do some coaching and I help out with the Browns, I say, you know what? In college, I remember my senior year, I played two guys who were All-Americans. And that was a game, both of them, that I really knew I had to get up for. Like, I really wanted to make sure my details were in order. I was studying the film. I had a great game plan going in, and I knew I had to give everything I had on every play. Like, everything I had, like, I'm running and that monster is chasing me in my dreams. And if he gets me, I'm going to die. So, like, I knew I had to give it all. In the NFL, that's every game. There's no, like, when I played, Indiana sucked, Purdue sucked, Northwestern sucked. Now they're a lot better. There's a lot more parity in college football. But, when I was there, you had all these cupcakes on your schedule. And so you had all these easy games. You a lot of times didn't even play the whole game because you'd get a big lead and then they'd take you out. But in the NFL, you look at the scouting report, it's like first round draft choice, defensive end, backup, second round draft choice. Both guys were all Americans. So it's like every single week you've got a stud that if you would have played him in college, you would have not slept for 6 nights straight. But that's just every day in the NFL. And so just learning to raise your level of play, learning to raise your process to become a perfectionist in everything you do. Every time you step on that field, every play, it matters at the NFL level. And you're being judged and you're being watched. And at any moment, the Grim Reaper can come down and grab you and tell you to turn in your playbook. And that wasn't the reality in college. So there's a lot more urgency, I think, in the NFL that I think it does push you, and guys that are ready to handle it, that can handle it mentally, that's when they become great players. And guys that can't, they're out of the league in a couple of years, no matter where you were drafted.
Sure. I think back on my personal experience, when I got to North Carolina, I was the smallest offensive lineman in the room.
Right.
And I was like, okay, this is no longer high school ball. I have
Yep.
to step up my game, not only knowing the playbook, but also being technically sound. So when you think back on your career, were there specific drills or habits that you really tried to hone in on so that you were able to take that next step as an offensive lineman and become the player that you ended up being?
I was really fortunate because last year I got a chance to take my whole family over to Munich, Germany, and I got to coach in the European League of Football, which is the highest professional league outside of the United States. It was an amazing experience, kids getting to go to international school in Germany, me being able to travel with my wife and my kids. But also it was really special because I got to coach professionals, 20 and 30-year-old men that loved the game of football, that maybe didn't have the background or the base knowledge or training that we do in the United States. But these were 300-pound men that loved the game of football that you could coach on a higher level than you could if I was working with high school kids, which I like to do with my trench training group that I'm a member of here in Wisconsin. And so it was really joyful to be able to kind of take my philosophies that I'd built watching and playing and then trying to implement them as a coach and try to see what works. And I know there's a lot of new techniques and new drills that are really awesome for offensive linemen. I mean, the evolution of training offensive linemen from off season and in season during practice when I started to where we are now is light years ahead. And I think we're creating a lot more quality offensive linemen that are coming through the pipeline right now. And I think you see it with all the great young tackles that are in the NFL right now. But I think there is sometimes a little bit of a tendency to get too obsessed with like the fancy new toys and all these great drills and trying to do a bunch of different things when really I think the fundamental philosophy, in my opinion, of training and building a great offensive lineman is how many quality reps can you get using the right technique and building a huge foundation of run and pass blocking by doing the same drills over and over again. And the fundamental philosophy and the baseline of learning how to run block is the base block. One on one, it's me taking my footwork, getting my 2 feet in the ground. And after that second step hits the ground, striking the defender. And so I would start every single practice when I was coaching with just basic. All right, we're going to all line up. We got a guy with holding a shield against their chest. They're not holding it in their hands. So they're doing is protecting their chest, but the offensive lineman still feels like they're hitting the chest of the defender. They're firing off the ball. They're exploding through their hips. They're bringing their hips after their hands make contact. They're controlling the defender with their hands. And we're going left foot first. Okay, now we're going to offset the defender to the other side. Now it's inside zone to the right. Boom. Now back to the left. We're going outside zone left. Now we're going outside zone right. And then working in the combinations. And I think that's really important to kind of build that base fundamental foundation because one, it builds strength. Two, it builds power. And three, you're honing in on every single day, making sure that your technique and your footwork is perfect. And then from there, now you can expand and start doing some of those other drills with the other apparatuses, which are great. But I think the number one mistake that I see coaches make is they try to do all these fancy things and they do it like once and they never become masters of those drills. And they don't understand, I think, that sometimes those one-off drills are good for teaching something very specific that maybe you need to work on, that you want to hit maybe once a week, or if you feel like that needs some emphasis. But really the foundation of run blocking is the base block. So you need to be able to do that every single day, and you need to do it at an intensity that is near max effort. It would be like going into the weight room and saying, I want to work on my bench press and become a better bench presser. But all you ever do is 50% of your 1 rep max, and you're doing like mid-level volume. Like you're never pushing yourself to build a bigger battery. Like your body, if you think about, okay, this is the battery, I can charge that battery up. I can become more conditioned to use what I have, or I can build a bigger battery by pushing the limits and forcing my body to respond and to grow and to become better and stronger and faster within the technique that I'm using as an offensive lineman. So I think pass pro, it starts with taking your sets every single day that you're going to take. A lot of coaches use the A, B, and C set language now where you're, vertical 45, 30, and then you got your jump set, and then you have maybe your 3-step jump set. But those are the things you need to do every single day. You need to be able to react against a defender. And I really like working against a defender that is not just half-assing it, right? They're really giving you a good look. Now, they have to do it within the drill and what you're trying to accomplish. But I think you need to get that full speed rep to be able to feel how it's supposed to feel. But even more important than that, because there are times in practice when I think slowing it down is good to make sure you are getting your technique. But even then, you need to have perfect technique. There's never a time in practice when you should be running a drill that your technique is not perfect. And this is one thing my last coach, Bob Wiley, said a bunch of times. And he was famous for Hard Knocks for being the tubby guy that said, "Sadat, Sadat." But he was an offensive line coach for like 30 years in the NFL, and he was a master of the mind, which was really cool. And that's the thing that I took from him the most. And he had some fancy word about it was like crap, I can't remember right now, but it was the idea that like your brain doesn't understand the difference between half speed and full speed, but it knows if you're in the right position. So if you're working a drill and you're in the right position from a technique standpoint, you got your ankles bent, your knees are bent, your hips are bent, your hands are in the right place, you're taking the proper footwork. Even if it's half speed, you're building that muscle memory so that when the defender speeds up, your brain can speed up to the level of your ability and your quickness and speed, of course. But getting 10 half speed reps with perfect technique is probably better in the long run than just getting one full speed rep. And so using a combination of those things are kind of my philosophy of how you want to build an offensive lineman to be great.
That's awesome. And when you think about an offensive lineman, it's all about that physicality piece, and like you were talking about, breaking down the basics and doing that day after day, so that becomes just secondhand to you when you're in that game time speed. And you kind of talked about it a little bit. I want to learn a little bit more about your mentality throughout your career, right? So I mean, I think the stat is 10,363 consecutive snaps, 10 and a half years that you didn't miss a single snap. With that level of consistency, how did you prepare mentally to go into every game ready to go and not miss a beat?
So the Browns have a young left tackle right now named Dewan Jones from Ohio State. He's 6'9", 375, great talent. Started more like a basketball player and then kind of converted to football. Unfortunately, he just got injured. He's out for the year, but I had a chance to work with him a lot during training camp this year, and we'd become pretty good friends. And just talking with him about building a great process. I would always break the season down into weeks, which makes sense because, each week you got one game and one opponent, but doing the same things Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday that you're doing so that it becomes second nature, and not just on the football field, but like how I'm taking notes in the meeting. I would always write everything down, even if it was something where you're sitting in some stupid HR meeting or like some NFL mandated meeting where you got to talk about, don't drink and drive or whatever. Like I wrote everything down because I found that if you write something down, it's keeping your brain engaged with what the speaker is saying. And it's very easy in a big meeting room, especially like if you're in a team meeting or an offensive meeting, the person that's talking is talking to everybody and maybe not always talking to you, but there might be one little nugget in that 30-minute meeting where he's telling you. And if you miss that, like that could be the difference of winning and losing. And that was my mentality that I took in every facet of what I did in meetings. And when I was playing football, like I have to be perfect because we're the bodyguards for our quarterback. And just like CIA and Secret Service, like one mistake is too many because that guy is counting on me for every single play. And a lot of times it's a violent sport. Like his health and wellness and the future of your team depends on you making sure that you hit every little detail. And so just taking notes all the time was something that I was very, very diligent about. And I also mandated my players when I was coaching with the Munich Ravens, like bring a notebook and a pen to every meeting. Like none of this, hey, you hear people say like, oh, I'm better at just remembering it if I just listen. No, that doesn't work. Write it down. Okay. Because then you can refer back to it. And one of the things that I did during my process is, having the same thing that I would do every single Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then I would take my notes, let's say on a Wednesday meeting, install meeting. At night, I would review the tape, but then I would go back to my notes and I would highlight all the things that weren't the falling off the log type knowledge stuff. And falling off the log is easy, right? So if we're running inside zone and I got a double because I got a guard bubble and I'm working with my guard, like I know that. I know who we're going to. But if it was an addendum or an adjustment that week, I wanted to highlight that because it was important for me to be able to remember that. And so as I'm going through the week, every day I would write at the top of my notebook what my goal was for that day. What was the thing I was trying to get better at? Because becoming a great offensive lineman is getting really good at a million independent skills. It's not like playing receiver where you're just catching the ball and running different routes. Like as offensive linemen, we got to run forward and run block. We got a zone block inside. We got a zone block outside. We got a zone block backside. We got to pull and run gap schemes. We got to run crack G's. We got to be able to pass pro. We got to be able to vertical set. We got to angle set. Like there's all these skills that you have to be great at. And the only way to get that is by getting better at one little thing each day. And so I would write on the top of my notebook what I wanted to get better at. And it would have to be measurable too. It wasn't like I just want to be a better tackle. No, it'd have to be like, I want to have my left shoulder a little bit lower in my vertical set. How am I going to do that was the next thing I would write. And it would be like, I'm going to go out before practice 10 minutes early and I'm going to get in my stance and I'm going to take 20 pass sets with perfect technique, focusing only on that one thing. And then I would go through practice and review practice. And at the end of practice review, I would go back to that goal and I would see if I was able to accomplish that. And if I was, great, I could check it off the list. Boom, I got another skill, another tool in my tool belt. If I didn't, then the next day I would work on that same thing, but I would try to attack it from a different angle. So I'd have a different way of approaching that with a different mindset. Like maybe now I need to have an apparatus and come out there and like maybe now I need to put a towel under my arm to keep my elbow tucked or whatever it is that gives you a different way to work on that skill until you master it, right? And then every day you were working on something, so you were always practicing with a purpose. I thought that was really, really important. And then after about Thursday, midweek, whatever your week looks like as a lineman, I would start making note cards. So I would take all the things that were in my playbook, every play, and I would write the play on the front in words that I would hear in the huddle. So, for instance, I write 96 power, basic play. So I could read that. And on the backside, it had all my tips from a scheme standpoint and a technique standpoint that I needed to remember. And some of them were easy, but just the practice of writing it down over and over again, you get to the point where not that you can get it right, but that you can't get it wrong, which I think is really important for a lineman because of the importance of being perfect on every play. And so I could go through those note cards then that I'd wrote for all those plays. And it was like getting a mental rep of being in that huddle because I was seeing the play written out just the way I'd be hearing it in a huddle. So if you're in a loud environment or something and you only hear part of it, all of a sudden it triggers that part in your mind that now you can see that note card that's in front of you. And from the moment that the huddle was broken until you get to the line of scrimmage, I was thinking about the things that were on the back of the note card, the flashcard, right? And so that process worked really, really well for me. And the guys that I've taught, that I've played with, Alex Max, Mitchell Schwartz, Joel Batonio, the guys that I played with in Cleveland, DeJuan Jones, now teaching him in Cleveland, like that's a really, really good way that I would encourage, especially a lot of younger players, to build that habit of writing flashcards where you have the play on the front and then you have your notes that are important to remember, because you have to have that checklist as you're going to the line of scrimmage of everything that could happen so that your mind is thinking about it when you're in your stance and you're thinking about what could happen. Because when you now start to see the little triggers and the tips in your mind, whether it be the safety moving over, the defensive end is getting a little tighter, whatever it is, because you're thinking about it on that checklist as you're going to the line of scrimmage, now you're able to react to it just a split second quicker. And a lot of times as an offensive lineman, it's just that little split second that you need. And that's the difference between strip sack, fumble, quarterback being taken off the field on a stretcher and, wow, you just blocked Dwight Freeney on an amazing rep and your quarterback threw it 40 yards down the field for a touchdown.
Ultimately, it's like becoming a master of the game, right? And I had a coach in college that was always talking about, you're prepared when you're able to visualize what's going to happen pre-snap. And if you're able to go through the plays and you know what their tendencies are, if that backer's walking up and you're going to be like, all right, it's going to be an A-gap blitz there. And you're able to visualize that before the ball's even snapped. That's when you know you're prepared. So taking that mindset, and I love your suggestion of note cards, right, of every single play, of writing every scenario out. A lot of our followers are in that high school phase right now with aspirations of either playing college or NFL. Any additional advice that you'd give them at that stage?
I think that you need to be very super critical. I talk to my guys a lot about the mirror test, right? We all have this thing called an ego, which I think most people, they think about ego as like a bad thing, but ego is just how you see yourself, right? It's and no matter who you are, no matter even if people say, "Oh, you have no ego," like you see yourself a certain way, and maybe you're harder on yourself than other people are, but I think it's important to see yourself how other people see yourself, and that's the mirror test, right? Because if you look yourself in the mirror, you're not seeing anything but exactly how you are. And that's how you have to visualize, and that's how you have to look at my performance, who I am as a lineman. And you have to be very honest with yourself. And it's hard sometimes when you play a bad game, when you have a bad rep, somebody gets the best of you, which happens to everybody. I don't care who you are. You got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, why did that happen? What do I need to do to fix it so it doesn't happen again? And I think getting to that stage is tough, but I think that's why film study is so important. And I think when you're in that film room as a coach, I didn't like to be a guy who was a yeller and screamer because I think that puts players on the defensive and then their egos try to protect. Sorry, they try to protect their ego because they don't want that ego to get hurt hearing something that's bad about them, right? But really, in order to learn at the highest, most efficient level, you have to be open-minded and you can't be emotionally heightened in those meetings because you need to be able to hear that information and understand what that coach is seeing and what you'd be seeing if you were looking at yourself in a mirror so that you can make those proper corrections that you need to make. And so I think it's really important going back to like those notes that you take to be able to write down the coaching points that you get from your coach and to be hypercritical. In the end, it's up to you and you're the one that's responsible for getting yourself better. And the only way you can do that is about being very honest with yourself about where you're at and where you want to be and how you're going to get there. And so I think just trying to take that ego out of it as much as you can, being super self-critical and being solutions oriented, growth mindset, I think is really, really important. Like, I want to get better every single day and making sure that you're always asking yourself, what's the purpose of what I'm doing right now? And we've all been there with coaches where they're having you do something that you just don't understand. You're like, this makes no sense. I feel like we're just wasting time in practice. And of course, you have to still do what the coach asks you to do, right? You can't just go rogue and do whatever you want. But in those moments, I would always think to myself, what's my purpose? What am I trying to get done? And even if I'm doing some worthless piece of shit drill that it doesn't make any sense, like I'm just running up and smashing a linebacker just because my coach wants to hear and see me smoke into a linebacker because his testosterone is flowing that day. Like I would think about, okay, how can I work on firing off the ball more efficiently? How can I work on my stance and creating tension in my lower body so that reaction time between when the ball is snapped and when I move is smaller? Like, no matter what you're doing, there should be a purpose that you're thinking about and you know about and you understand, even if it's within the larger context of maybe doing a drill that you don't really find any purpose for.
There's so many life lessons, right? And you're just talking about it there with the different mentalities, even in those practices and those drills that you're like, what are we doing here? But there's ultimately a goal that you're working towards. And my last question today is, when you think back on your football career, was there any, experiences or lessons that you've now carried to your life post football? And now that you've made that transition away from the game, and how does that impact you still day to day?
All of them. It's
Yep.
amazing. I think the reason us as Americans have taken to football to be our national sport and be beloved by so many people, even people that have never played the game one snap in their life, is because what it takes to be great at football and specifically offensive line play are a lot of the same things that it takes to be successful in life, right? The idea of creating a team where the sum of the parts is not as great as the whole, where when you collectively put your own agenda aside and you work towards a common goal with other people, you become greater than the sum of the parts. And I think that idea of teamwork is typified with offensive line play. When you have five guys that have to operate together at all times and be on the same page in order for us to look good. And if we can do that, we can overcome defensive linemen who are always better athletes than us. They're always faster than us. They're always stronger than us. That's why they're playing on the defensive line and we're on the offensive line. If we were 4'5", 40 guys, and if we were 6'6", 300 pounds and we could run like a deer, like we'd be over there because we'd be collecting sacks and we'd be collecting bigger checks, but we're not. And so we have to find a way like Gladiator, like 300 to work together to cover up each other's weaknesses with a common goal by highlighting each other's strengths and working together. And I think the sacrifice that you learn as an offensive lineman, putting in long hours and hard days when nobody's watching in August and it's hot and it's miserable and the coach stuck the offensive line in the corner. You're not even on the football field. They give you a 10 by 10 foot square of grass because nobody really cares about you till you screw up. Like understanding, you know what, we're mushrooms here as offensive linemen. People are going to put us in a dark corner, throw shit on us, and then expect great things on Saturday or Sunday. And we just have to embrace that. We were really lucky in Cleveland. My last 2 years, we brought the Navy SEALs in and they trained us. And the thing that I took away more than anything was the mindset of teamwork, of sacrifice, shared sacrifice, most importantly, and the idea of embracing the suck and finding a way amongst your friends, amongst your teammates, amongst your offensive line group to enjoy the misery and relish in it because you know that that's what's going to make you great. And if everybody is on the same page with the same mindset of wanting to be great, you're very much more easily able to overcome the miserable experience that being an offensive lineman is when it's 100 degrees and you got a helmet on and you're out there for 3 hours smashing skulls against a defensive line in 9-on-7 or in half line or in one-on-one run blocking because you know that there's a higher purpose. And I've always said, I want to be a great servant to my teammates because I know that I'll work harder for somebody else than I will work for myself. And the theme of my Hall of Fame speech when I gave it in Canton, Ohio in 2023, when I got to the NFL Hall of Fame, was to count on me because I always wanted to be that guy that everybody could look to in the huddle and that they knew that they could count on me in good times and in bad. Like adversity, the most important thing for a leader is to be able to have everybody look at you and find strength and leadership and direction from you. So I always wanted to make sure that I cared more about my left guard's family, his wife and his kids. I wanted to see them have success and get all the accolades that he could possibly get so that he could build the life that he wanted for his family because I knew that when things were hard in the fourth quarter and I was tired, maybe I was cramping, maybe I was dealing with a torn MCL and I was having blurred vision because I'm dehydrated, I was going to be able to push myself a little bit further because I knew that it was important for that guy to be able to count on me and to always be the person that I said I was going to be and that I knew I could push myself beyond what I thought was possible because I cared about that guy that was next to me. And so I think it's just such a great reflection of life when you play on the offensive line and you learn to embrace the suck. You learn to relish in the details and the misery and the willingness for us to do the other things that people are not willing to do. That's what makes us great as offensive linemen.
Yeah, as you said, it's so special as an offensive line that you're a unit of five, right? And my buddies always make fun of us in college because when we'd pull up to the different bars or go to the different classes, we'd always be running as a pack together. And it's one of those special units in sports that I know that my guards to either side and the tackles out there as well have got my back, and I'm working for them on and off the field. That's why I think offensive line, being an offensive lineman is so special. But Joe, I really appreciate you joining today. This has been awesome. I've learned a lot, and I know that our listeners will as well. Anything that you're working on right now that you want to talk about before we close this thing out?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So my life as an offensive lineman was amazing, but I'm one of the I should say one of the things that I talk to a lot of guys that are getting ready to retire from the NFL is like you need to find purpose in something else when you retire. And you have to understand that you're going to be the last one to realize that you're not a football player anymore because it becomes your identity for your entire life. Like it's who you are. Wherever you go, people know you as a football player. As a 300-pounder, you're not hiding anywhere, right? You walk around campus anywhere when you're in college. You walk around anywhere in the city you're playing in. People know who you are, especially like you said, you always hang out, right? But the moment you retire, they see you as a guy that's not a football player anymore. You used to be. You might still think you're a football player, but it's going to take some time, but you have to embrace the fact that this is a transition and now I'm a new person. And so for me, I went from 320 pounds, I'm like 250 now. A lot of that was because I wanted to focus on health. I wanted to focus on my wellness. I wanted to feel better. You know, after playing 11 years in the NFL, you got a lot of injuries, a lot of arthritis. And I wanted to be there for my four kids. I wanted to be able to run and play and coach and wrestle with them and be the dad that was my dad to me. And part of that was losing weight and really starting to focus on my health and starting to really dive deep into like where my food comes from, the type of food I'm putting in my body, the fuel that I'm putting in my body. And I had a farm since 2012 in Wisconsin, and my kids really encouraged me, and it just worked perfect with my transition to eating better and taking better care of myself to start raising as much food as we possibly could on that farm. So we started raising some cattle just for us because I knew I wanted to know everything that goes into that cattle's body because I knew in the end of the day, that beef was going to be what I was putting into my body. And I started giving away some beef to my family and friends, and they were like, wow, this is really good. This is way better than the stuff we get at the butcher shop or the grocery store. And then as we started growing, I realized, like, wow, there's a lot of people out there that are looking for this. They're looking for beef that is delicious, it's nutritious. They know where it comes from. They know the things that that animal has been eating is going to be good for them. It's going to make them feel good. And so now we've kind of transitioned and built that thing into Hall of Fame beef. So you can check us out on all the social media, Hall of Fame beef, and then www.hallofffamebeef.com. And we're selling Wagyu and Angus cattle. Got into the Wagyu business like 4 or 5 years ago because I had started to do a lot of research on what's the healthiest beef that you can possibly eat. And of course, Wagyu is very tasty as well, but I felt on my farm, Six Springs Farm in Wisconsin, that we could raise some of the best, healthiest beef on planet Earth. And I was proving it by eating it and giving it to my friends and how they felt and how I felt and the enjoyment that we got bringing people together, having this amazing high quality beef. And so with the Wagyu, like it has a much higher level of omega 3s and omega 6s. The ratio is perfect. It's got other nutrients that help you reduce inflammation. It's a healthier fat because it's a higher level of monounsaturated fat. And I really wanted to just be able to raise that beef and provide it to other people, that high quality beef, to be able to get that enjoyment and to live that healthy lifestyle that I was living. And so it's been a real passion project for me. And it's also helped me transition from being a football player to not being a football player anymore, and being a dad and coaching my son in flag football and still being a football analyst, but being somebody who is really focused and dedicated on a single mission of trying to raise the best, highest quality, healthiest beef on planet Earth, and then offering that to as many people as I possibly can. And so it's been a fun journey. I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity to talk about that. And if you give me your address, I'll send you some of that glorious golden nuggets that we're
Let's do
raising
it.
on my farm in
Let's do
Wisconsin.
it.
And I know one thing about offensive linemen is they're not going to turn down amazing food. So
No,
I feel like this might
never.
happen.
Yeah, for sure. We got to do that. Are you a medium rare guy?
I am. So I'll usually take my ribeyes a little bit more than medium rare just to render a little bit more of the fat. But definitely, like, my go-to steak is either a Denver off the Wagyu, because the Wagyu is a lot higher marbling. And so it's a lot more tender also. So a Denver is amazing, or a bavette. But if I'm just eating Angus, or the Wagyu too is pretty good. I'm a New York
Yeah.
strip guy, medium rare. Give me a nice hard sear, started on that fat cap, and I'm a happy guy.
Getting me hungry already, and it's only the morning. So I'm looking forward to trying that out. Joe, thank you again so much for joining today, and for everybody tuning in. Follow Trench Talent. We're going to continue to put out content like this, highlighting the best in the game from the offensive linemen and highlighting that next generation athletes in the trenches. Joe, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time, buddy. Thanks for having me on.